From the standpoint of the United States, there's this tendency of Americans from really the American Revolution until the present to think that whatever war they're involved in is the last war. Woodrow Wilson once put it very straightforwardly when he said that this was going to be the war to end all wars. Now, not all war leaders have put it quite that bluntly, but there is this sort of abiding optimism in Americans that if we can fight this war and win this war, then we can establish the conditions of peace that will prevent our having to fight other wars. Americans, by and large, I think, would like to believe that war is not the normal situation for international affairs, that wars are aberrations, and wars can be explained by a failure of diplomacy, they can be explained by extraordinarily bad people in other countries, whether it's Adolf Hitler or Saddam Hussein. But war is not something that the human race is condemned to live with forever. But despite this optimism, the United States has never gone more than 10 years or so without a war, either a major foreign war or smaller internal wars or brush fire wars, wars of one sort or another. And so I suppose the lesson of the 20th century is very much like the lesson of the 19th century, and that is, as much as we hope to win whatever war we're involved in and to make lasting peace out of that war, that odds are pretty good there will be another war before too long. I think the human race has never demonstrated an ability to go very long without war, but whether that's because of some failure of political or diplomatic arrangements or because of some inherent evil in human nature is hard to tell. Now, there have been times when the world has gone for a fairly long period of time without really big wars. In fact, from the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815 in Europe until the outbreak of the First World War, there wasn't really a major war in Europe during 99 years. And so it was pretty easy for people, starting with Europeans, but including Americans, to think that maybe the problem of war had been solved. And there was a vogue during the early part of the 20th century among Europeans and American onlookers to think that another major war was impossible. The economies of the Western powers had become so intertwined. The interests of the intelligentsia, of the ruling classes, in some cases even of the royal families of Europe, these were also interconnected, that war would simply be impossible. There was also a belief that modern war had become so expensive that governments fighting wars would soon run out of money and the wars would have to stop. That was the belief of many Americans at the beginning of World War I. They just calculated how fast the French and the British and the Germans and the Russians were going through ammunition and all the other materials required to make war, and they realized that those governments were going to run out of money fairly soon. What they didn't reckon on was how imaginative the governments of the belligerent powers would be in funding wars and how attractive loans to belligerents would be to American bankers. That's how the United States first got involved in the European war, by lending money to the belligerents. And so the First World War went on far longer than anyone had expected.